Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary.
Big countries stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, no, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay.
There are reports that President Trump has paused military aid to Ukraine. Mr. Trump previously refused to confirm if he would temporarily stop aid to the nation, but he made it clear it's a fast-moving situation. The US president launched a fresh attack on Volodymyr Zelensky as well.
Meanwhile, the European Union Commission chief has presented a plan to mobilise 800 billion euros for European defence.
In the heart of Eurasia, a nation stands as a vital crossroads between continents, cultures, and ideologies. Turkey, a country with a rich history stretching back millennia, has increasingly emerged as a key player in the European security framework. From its strategic geographical location to its evolving political and military capabilities, Turkey's role in Europe's security landscape is no longer a mere footnote. It is central to shaping the future of the region. In the annals of human history, the growth of nations, the rise and fall of empires, appear as if dependent on the will and prowess of man. The shaping of events seems, to a great degree, to be determined by his power, ambition, or caprice. But in the Word of God the curtain is drawn aside, and we behold, above, behind, and through all the play and counterplay of human interest and power and passions, the agencies of the All-merciful One, silently, patiently working out the counsels of his own will. Let's watch the rising of the sick man of the East, Trump versus Europe. You don't want to miss this.
The world is stirred with the spirit of war. The prophecy of the 11th chapter of Daniel has nearly reached its complete fulfillment. Soon the scenes of trouble spoken of in the prophecies will take place.
This conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense.
Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
The prospect of Washington cutting all its support to Kyiv has prompted European NATO members to step up, and it's forcing them to take a hard look at their own arsenals.
Could you take on Russia by yourselves?
Well, U.S. capabilities are, for the most part, irreplaceable for Europe.
Defense ministers from Europe's 5 leading military powers are meeting in Paris to discuss their support for Ukraine. France, Germany, Britain, Italy, and Poland plan to provide security guarantees for Ukraine in the event of a peace deal with Russia. Now, the so-called E5 meeting was set to discuss the importance of U.S. involvement in security guarantees as well. The UK and others are calling for guarantees from the White House in the case that the peacekeeping force is attacked, which so far the U.S. has declined to provide. European military powers are aiming for a united front, although Poland has so far said that it will not allow its troops to be based inside Ukraine.
EU leaders have agreed to increase defense funding by hundreds of billions of euros. This follows signals from the Trump administration that Europe should strengthen its own security and a landmark proposal to increase spending in Germany. European defense stocks have been surging this week, along with the European markets overall. And joining us right now to talk more about it is Michelle Caruso-Cabrera, MCC Global Enterprises CEO, also a CNBC contributor. And Michelle, this is pretty historic. People are looking at this and saying, wow, this is a complete change in what we can anticipate, what we can expect, what it's going to mean for the entire German economy.
It is a monumental shift in modern thinking for Germany and basically all of Europe. The incoming leader of Germany has proposed and is likely to get from the parliament unlimited spending ability on defense. You know, a year ago, unheard of that this would be possible. So if they go from 2.5% of GDP, where they are roughly now, to 3.5%. That's another $45 to $60 billion worth of spending from Germany alone. That's why you see the defense stocks there rallying, some of them up more than 100% year to date. And based on what we saw coming out of Europe yesterday, you could see all the other countries do the same thing, which means a massive amount of increase in spending from Italy, from France, etc. This is driven by the fear that the United States is no longer going to necessarily have their back when it comes to defense.
They didn't step up for Ukraine, did they?
So that's the thing that they face right now, right?
Kind of this is the moment.
Telling Ukraine
we're going to do whatever you need.
When Ukraine's president arrived to meet EU leaders, he received a warm reception.
This is great that we are not alone. We feel it and we know it. Thank you so much for everything.
Unlike the US, which has halted military aid and stopped sharing intelligence with Kyiv, the EU is proposing a more than $1 trillion plan to aid Ukraine and to rearm Europe in the face of what officials say is a threat from Russia.
Spent on defense and deterrence. That's the most important message.
French President Emmanuel Macron went even further, saying he's willing to share France's nuclear arsenal with the country's European neighbors. The French military has nearly 300 nuclear weapons. Russia has nearly 6,000.
Soon strife among the nations will break out with an intensity that we do not now anticipate. The present is a time of overwhelming interest to all living, rulers and statesmen, men who occupy positions of trust and authority, thinking men and women of all classes, have their attention fixed upon the events taking place about us. They are watching the strained, restless relations that exist among the nations. They observe the intensity that is taking possession of every earthly element, and they realize that something great and decisive is about to take place, that the world is on the verge of a stupendous crisis.
After World War II, the U.S. was tired of fighting in Europe.
Twice in the last 40 years, our country has thrown its full economic and military power into a deadly struggle to prevent the triumph of a dangerous aggressor in Western Europe.
But it was worried that it would have to again. The Soviet Union had seized control of Eastern Europe and was threatening to take over the West too. These countries had ruined economies, little trust for each other, and their tired militaries were no match for the Soviets. But instead of leaving a vulnerable Europe to fend for itself, the US decides to help protect it, at least until it could defend itself. It gives these countries $13 billion to rebuild and encourages them to trade together. Then the US joins them in a military alliance, NATO, where every member pledges to help in the event that one of them is attacked, meaning the Soviets would need to be willing to take on all these countries, plus the US. To prove it was serious, the US bases some of its own troops, weapons, and even nuclear bombs inside European countries.
More than 1 million men have been added to the armed forces of the European members through NATO. The communists have not gained an inch of territory in Europe since the treaty was signed.
Defending Europe was expensive, but it did have its benefits. The US economy boomed thanks to exporting materials to Europe. Over the next few decades, European countries recover and NATO expands, but the US doesn't leave.
There were tensions from the war about the idea of Germany rearming. States wanted to do different things. They were all still rebuilding and a lot of debt. And so the US kind of ends up staying in order to smooth all of that over.
The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 gives the US another chance to step back. No country was threatening to take over Western European countries, and most of them had grown rich. But instead, the US pushes to invite more countries into NATO, thereby extending its protection to more of Europe.
Bill Clinton in the 1990s really wanted to appeal to voters of Eastern European origin in swing states. And the idea that if the US were to pull back from Europe, maybe the Europeans would go their own way, and that was something we didn't want.
Despite the new members, the US does reduce the number of troops it has in Europe. The problem was, so did Europe. They dramatically cut defense spending, largely in service of expanding social programs.
That the European states in the 1990s basically take a much larger peace dividend, to the point today where I would say that relationship is extremely unbalanced.
Since Russia's 2022 invasion, many European governments have pledged to ramp up weapons production in their own countries. But even with larger defence budgets, turning those words into action has been a challenge.
Remember, most of these components and systems essentially went out of production after the Cold War. So Europe is trying to rebuild an industry that hasn't been in place in 30-something years. When Russia launched its large-scale invasion of Ukraine, Europe restarted from almost a standing start its defense industry.
One of the biggest assets in Ukraine's arsenal has been self-propelled artillery, including howitzers. European countries have allocated more than 400 of these systems to Ukraine since 2022. These militaries used to have hundreds in their arsenals, but after post-Cold War downsizing and deliveries to Ukraine, some of their stocks have fallen to double digits. Russia has more than 1,700. And even though Moscow has lost more than 4,000 main battle tanks since 2022, its current stock of around 2,700 is far more than what these individual European militaries maintain, after having thousands in their arsenals 30 years prior. Germany's taken a leading role and has broken ground on the first Patriot missile production facility in Europe. The factory is expected to produce up to 1,000 Patriot missiles for NATO allies, but they aren't scheduled to be delivered until 2027.
It's not improving as fast as the Ukrainians, as many Europeans want, and now with the added pressure from Washington, Europe needs to move even faster, and it just is not in shape to do that.
2 articles on the Eastern question were sent out while the war between Turkey and the Balkan states was at its height, and editors gladly published them. Brethren in different places also wrote on this subject, and the doctrines held by our people concerning the fall of the Turkish Empire as viewed from the light of prophecy, were given extensive publicity. Copies of the letter sent by Brother Greaves about Turkey and Greece were published in 15 or 20 states.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk proposed that Turkey take an active role in initiating peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. At a joint press conference with Turkish President Recep Erdogan, Tusk said both Turkey and Poland have wanted peace since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
This photo of Turkish President Erdogan and Volodymyr Zelensky has gone viral. The Ukrainian embassy in Turkey shared it just a few hours after Donald Trump gave Zelensky an unprecedented dressing down at the White House. While Washington is pivoting away from Ukraine, many suggested that the scene was a reminder of Erdogan's firm support of Zelensky. And it seems Turkey is looking to play a bigger role in Europe's security. It has the second largest army in NATO after the US. Erdogan has warned that the continent's defenses need his involvement.
Without including Turkey, it's becoming increasingly impossible for Europe to continue being a global actor. To put it plainly, establishing European security without Turkey is inconceivable.
But Erdogan has already made it clear that his involvement would not be for free.
We remain committed to our goal of full EU membership. We expect a strategic and visionary attitude from the EU and accordingly an immediate revitalization of our relations.
Just like you said, Jumanna, I think up until a few weeks ago, discussing Turkey and EU relations or Turkey's membership to the bloc was, not taken quite seriously. But the U.S. administration's policy direction is definitely making EU officials, I think, revisit that membership bid. That was apparent in a press conference yesterday between Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, where both leaders highlighted the importance of having Turkey part of the bloc. President Erdogan has repeatedly said over the last few days that an EU without Turkey is unthinkable, and that Turkey can provide benefits to the bloc in terms of security and defense. And I think Turkey's NATO membership and its strategic location, as well as having the second largest army in NATO, is definitely making EU officials rethink their security alliances and their strategic alliances.
Yeah, I mean, it's
It's also a part of NATO, and also Turkey has emerged as a major power broker within the Middle East region as well. And you've got Donald Trump testing that transatlantic alliance. So would you say it actually makes sense for closer ties between EU and Turkey right now?
I think there are a lot of factors for the EU-Turkey relations to deepen. Like we both mentioned, Turkey is a NATO member and has the second largest army. And under President Erdogan, Turkey's defense capabilities have flourished over the past 2 decades, with the president really pushing for locally produced arms, whether that be drones or armored vehicles or missiles. So the defense abilities are definitely one of its strong cards. In terms of its location too, Turkey has traditionally straddled the East and the West, and it has maintained good relations, with both the Western allies as well as with Russia and China. And we've seen in the past how this geographical location made sense. It was a key actor in having Ukrainian grain be transported to international markets, for example. And Turkey and the EU have a big economic relationship as well. The EU is Turkey's largest trade partner.
Yeah.
Now there is no question but that the extraordinary successes of Japan and China's energetic pulling of herself together have had a remarkable and electric effect upon the Mohammedans of the Ottoman Empire. The heathen Buddhists, formerly despised as blackest infidels, now appear as shining lights and examples in their eyes. To the deeds of the people of the Far East, the Japanese, must be attributed the vision of liberty and freedom from interference by the great powers, toward which the people of the Near East, the Ottoman Turks, are striving. All Islam is awakening, and is determined to come into her own, politically and nationally as well as religiously. I have already mentioned the manifestations of this spirit in the popular unrest in India, which ever since the Russo-Japanese War has given the British government so much concern. Then there are the 9 million Mohammedans of the Nile lands. These are unbounded in their enthusiasm at the revival of the constitution in Turkey. True, the Turks have never enjoyed much popularity with the Egyptians. At the present moment, however, they all join together in longing for the restored sovereignty of the constitutional caliph.
It began in 1999. That's when Turkey was made an EU candidate. It's the first step in becoming a member. Over the next few years, Turkey tried to bring in some reforms, clean up its internal politics so that the EU would begin accession talks. And the plan worked. Talks began in 2005. But just before that, Turkey elected a new leader for itself, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In 2003, Erdogan became Turkey's Prime Minister. Yes, Prime Minister. He held that post till 2014. All that while, the EU talks kept chugging along. But in 2014, Erdogan flipped the script. He changed Turkey's power structure. From a parliamentary democracy, Turkey became a presidential republic. And of course, he made sure that he became Turkey's first directly elected president. Now, Erdogan was always a popular politician. He did keep winning elections over the years, but the 2014 flip was a watershed moment. Erdogan seemed to believe he was some sort of Ottoman Sultan reincarnated. He wanted to change the very foundations of modern Turkey and take it back to a bygone era where democracy gave way to absolute power, both administrative and spiritual. But on his quest to become a modern-day Ottoman caliph, Erdogan alienated the EU. And things came to a head in 2016. Some 3,000 members of the Turkish armed forces attempted to orchestrate a coup. They failed, and the plotters were arrested. Erdogan saw the failed coup as an opportunity, a chance to purge his political opponents. That's exactly what he did. About 150,000 people were detained after the coup. Tens of thousands were arrested on terrorism charges. And that was the last straw for the EU. Turkey's EU accession talks were paused. 3 years later, in 2019, the European Parliament suspended negotiations. It's been 5 years since that happened, and these years have been hard on Erdogan. The EU took the first step towards reconciliation. They invited Turkey's foreign minister to an informal meet yesterday. The Turkish minister attended the meeting in Brussels and said it was in everyone's interest to revive Turkey-EU ties. While this doesn't mean that the EU will restart accession talks this instant, it's a step towards bringing Turkey back into the fold. But for that to actually happen, Erdogan will have to keep his autocratic tendencies in check.
Realizing the value and the advantages of these increased opportunities, nations have become possessed of boundless ambitions to extend their boundaries, their commerce, and their power. It is these ambitions, so possible of realization, that multiply the probabilities and dangers of international competition and strife and war. As ocean traffic has developed, the great nations have been in sharp, determined competition to establish themselves in advantageous and strategic positions in all parts of the world. To this end, they have built navies and merchant fleets, they have secured extensive colonial possessions, and developed far-reaching commercial enterprises. But with all this extension of boundary lines, increase of population, and growth of commerce, no nation seems to be satisfied. Russia's determination to gain greater advantages by securing free, safe, permanent access to the oceans, through the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, has always been looked upon by the other nations as a great menace to their interests and welfare. On the other hand, the nations claim that Germany's determination to establish a route, under German control, from the North Sea to the Persian Gulf, imperils their very existence.
Turkey is a major force, by the way, and Erdogan is somebody I got along with great, but he has a major military force, and his has not been worn out with war. It hasn't been worn out with all of the other things. I mean, he's built a very strong, powerful army. And so we have 5,000 soldiers in between a 5 million person army and a 250,000 person army. And I asked the general, what do you think of that situation? He said, they'll be wiped out immediately. And I moved them out and I took a lot of heat. And you know what happened? Nothing. I saved a lot of lives. Now we have 900. They put some back. But 900, if you're talking about two, now one of the sides has been essentially wiped out, but nobody knows who the other side is. But I do. You know who it is? Turkey. Okay? Turkey's the one behind it. He's a very smart guy. They've wanted it for thousands of years, and he got it. And those people that went in are controlled by Turkey. And that's okay. It's another way to fight. But nobody knows what the final outcome is going to be in the region. You know, nobody knows who really the final. I believe it's Turkey, and I think Turkey is very smart. He's a very smart guy, and he's very tough. But Turkey did an unfriendly takeover without a lot of lives being lost.
Can I say that the Turkish defense industrial base is really impressive? There are a couple of hundred organizations working on the innovation side. There are a couple of thousand companies involved, part of the secretariat, the Turkish secretariat for the defense industry. I met in Ankara, but he also visited me here. The chief of that agency, directly reporting into the president, into President Erdogan's office. So that is really important. And I know there is a close cooperation between what you are doing in Turkey with other allies all over Europe and with the US. And you are really supplying some of the most important parts and sometimes end products in terms of what the Turkish industry is producing. And we can only ask you to do more. Whatever you can do in Turkey to ramp it up, to do more, to have even more shifts and more production lines. My prediction is in 4 or 5 years you will see them all filled to max capacity because the money is there. And the same goes for Naval and Thales in France and for Leonardo in Italy and for Rheinmetall in Germany and for all the BAE in the UK and all the other proud defense industry companies in Europe and Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed Martin and all the other companies in the US. We really have to do that. So let's not discuss too much what we need to do in terms of stimulating that defense industry. No, tell them the money is there, produce, and make sure that we stay safe here.
Ankara is proud of its arms and defense industries, which have developed significantly over the past decade, producing everything from short-range missiles to high-tech drones. In 2024, Turkish defense exports increased to over $7 billion. Bayraktar TB2 drones have been sold to countries around the world, including EU members Poland and Romania. Well, Turkey wants to buy 40 of these fighter jets, which are jointly built by Germany, the UK, Spain and Italy. And all of these 4 countries have to agree to an export. And so far, Berlin had been putting the brakes on it over legal and human rights concerns. In recent years, the German government has only approved limited arms exports to Turkey, but that seems to be changing. According to reports, Berlin has recently green-lighted some weapons exports to Turkey, and there seems to be some movement on the Eurofighter issue as well. Let's listen.
Briefly and bluntly stated, the whole Eastern question springs from Russia's desire to possess Constantinople and the efforts of the other great powers of Europe, and especially Britain, to keep her from it. For more than 1,000 years Russia has been wanting Constantinople. In this time she has made a number of attempts to gain it. Once she practically had it, but a brilliant move of Britain with other powers prevented her from keeping it, and thus arose the Eastern question in fact.
Analysts say that as a sign of warming relations, European leaders have started lifting their opposition to key Turkish military hardware sales, as Ankara seeks to modernize its military, which it claims will be in the interest of all of Europe. The United States' newest munitions factory uses Turkish company Repcon's state-of-the-art equipment and could ultimately account for 1/3 of shell production in the US, which analysts say is vital to meeting Ukraine's current shortages. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan recently commissioned Turkey's latest state-of-the-art submarine, along with a helicopter carrier, new frigates, and more than a dozen other warships under construction. These are part of Erdogan's drive to make the Turkish Navy among Europe's largest.
It's worth highlighting that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan addressed Turkey's Army War College commencement and flag handover ceremony last week, during the course of which he proclaimed his intention to further broaden his country's military footprint around the globe.
We have not and will not give in to those trying to confine us to shallow waters. We will think Turkey-centered, but we will keep our vision broad enough to encompass the world. From Syria to northern Iraq, and from Libya to Somalia, our armed forces honorably fulfill their duties everywhere they are tasked.
As Turkey continues to expand its military reach and capabilities, it is clear the country is positioning itself as the major power broker in the region. The only competitor that offers a credible threat to Turkey is Russia, but they find themselves bogged down in the war in Ukraine and facing NATO expansion northwards. At its height, the Ottoman Empire spanned 3 continents and ruled major parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Such heights are not attainable in the short term, but it is a compelling narrative that Turkish leaders can tell their citizens. In the modern geopolitical climate, Turkey is largely out of focus from the Western media. The Ukraine war, rise of India, and tensions in the South China Sea all capture far more attention. But that lack of focus also represents the Turkish opportunity. As the US steps back from the world and globalization unwinds, a regional power with manufacturing capacity, valuable maritime access, and military might is poised to expand into the void.
The role the papacy has of persecuting God's people, as given in Revelation 13 and 17, must not be confused with the role Turkey, the king of the north, has of signaling to the world what next event follows. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. This movement on the part of Turkey is the signal for the standing up of Michael. That is, it marks this event as next in order.
President Erdogan went on to declare that Turkey could never turn its back on Jerusalem, where the Ottoman Empire had ruled for 4 centuries after conquering it from the Egyptian Mamluks in 1517 AD and ultimately yielding it to the British Empire, to include forces from the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and India in 1917.
How can we turn our backs on Jerusalem, where our forefathers ruled in peace, tranquility, and prosperity for 4 centuries? How can we turn a blind eye to the land of Palestine, where Gazi Mustafa Kemal Ataturk fought to keep the enemy from reaching it? How can we turn a deaf ear to the cries of our Palestinian brothers who have been subjected to genocide by Israel for 11 months? Who can separate Istanbul and Holy Jerusalem?
Also, very shortly after the takeover of Syria, Turkey's embassy in Damascus was up and running. Turkish intelligence officials were some of the first to meet with HTS leaders after a government was formed, and Turkey sent advisors and support to create the new Syrian army, navy, and air force. All of this is very dangerous for the state of Israel. As huge of a threat as Iran is to Israel, they are a decaying nation hundreds of miles from Israel's borders, and their major source of power came from guerrilla warfare, terrorist tactics on Israel's borders through Hezbollah and Hamas. But with Turkey, things are different. Turkey has had a massive modern military ranked in the top 10 worldwide. They are part of NATO. They have U.S. nuclear weapons stored in their country, and now they have direct access to Israel's borders through HTS in Syria. And Turkey hates Israel's guts. Over the years, Turkey has accused Israel of genocide again and again. They claim Israel has surpassed Hitler in barbarism. This last year in 2024, Turkey officially cut their trade agreement with Israel worth $7 billion annually, and then 2 months later threatened to send troops to invade Israel's borders if they didn't end the war with Hamas. Thankfully, that threat hasn't materialized yet. Then several months later, Turkey went so far as to cut all diplomatic ties with Israel.
Mr. President, take us to Jerusalem. 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 Mr. President, take us to Jerusalem.
Do not forget, young people, whoever is patient achieves victory.
Everything in this world is in an unsettled state. The nations are angry and preparations for war are being made. But though there is among the nations an increasing unrest, though they are mustering their forces, they are as if held back from action by an unseen power. The angels are holding the 4 winds until the servants of God are sealed in their foreheads.
Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe, comment, like, and share. God bless.